The day of departure arrived, and with it, a heavy sense of finality. Captain Mira Renard stood at the command deck of the Aegis, gazing out at the vastness of space, where the shattered barrier waited. Humanity had attempted to break through the barrier countless times before, but every effort had failed, or worse, vanished without a trace. This time, however, there was no room for failure. Earth's last chance lay in this mission. The Aegis was their final hope. "We're ready, Captain," said Lieutenant Ryan, his voice calm but tinged with anticipation. He turned from the communication console, eyes flicking over the readouts. "All systems are go. The crew's ready for launch." Renard nodded, her mind racing despite her composed exterior. Beneath the reassuring hum of the Aegis engines, her heart was gripped by the magnitude of what lay ahead. This wasn't just a mission. It was humanity's last stand. If they failed, Earth's civilization could be obliterated by an alien force so powerful that even their brightest minds could not understand it. The shattered barrier had thwarted every attempt to cross it, leaving questions and mysteries in its wake. Initiating countdown in T-5 minutes, Lieutenant Commander Ilara Hayes announced, her voice steady but carrying an edge of urgency. She was the mission's lead scientist, and her insights into the barrier's anomalies were humanity's most valuable asset. But even she couldn't shake the foreboding sense of dread hanging in the air. The data had all led them here, but there were no guarantees. As the final moments ticked away, the crew busied themselves with last-minute checks. Renard's gaze flitted across the faces of her crew, men and women, veterans and rookies, all of them united by one purpose: to break through the final frontier. There was no going back after this. "Captain," Ilara's voice broke through her thoughts. "I've been reviewing the latest data from our deep space probes. There's something strange about the barrier. A signal. It's faint, almost like a whisper, but it's unlike anything we've ever encountered." Renard's brow furrowed. "A signal? From within the barrier?" She had heard no such reports. "Can you isolate it?" "I'm trying," Ilara replied, fingers flying over her console. "But it's irregular. It doesn't follow any known frequencies. It's almost like a message." She hesitated. "But from who or what, I can't say. I'll keep analyzing it, but we don't have time to waste." The countdown continued. The tension in the room grew palpable. They were on the cusp of something momentous, an unknown that could change everything or destroy them all. Renard took a deep breath, pushing the doubt from her mind. It was too late to second-guess now. 4 minutes until launch, Ryan called out. "Are we ready, Captain?" Renard turned to face her crew. Their faces, full of hope and fear, reflected her own struggle. This mission was humanity's final shot. Failure meant extinction. She had no choice but to lead them into the unknown. "Ready," she said, her voice firm. "Proceed with launch." The Aegis slowly rose from its docking platform, cutting through the heavy atmosphere of Earth's dying days. Above, the vastness of space loomed. And beyond that, the shattered barrier. The signal Ilara had detected continued to pulse faintly, like a beacon from the dark heart of the universe. But for now, there was no time to investigate. Their course was set. "Engage the engines," Renard ordered, gripping the edge of her chair. The Aegis shuddered, and the stars outside blurred into streaks as they accelerated toward the unknown. The final frontier beckoned. The Aegis surged forward, its engines roaring as they sliced through the final layers of Earth's atmosphere. Outside, the darkness of space yawned ahead, infinite and imposing. The crew was silent, save for the hum of the ship's systems and the occasional sharp command from the bridge. Captain Mira Renard remained at the helm, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair, eyes fixed on the holographic display before her. They had entered the outer reaches of space, and the shattered barrier loomed ever closer. Distance to the barrier, 5 minutes, Lieutenant Ryan called, his voice steady but betraying a hint of awe. Renard nodded, though the knot in her stomach tightened. They had trained for this moment for years, but no amount of preparation could ready them for the unknown. The barrier, vast and seemingly impenetrable, had thwarted every attempt to breach it. Every probe sent before them had returned with no more than scrambled data or, worse yet, nothing at all. This was humanity's last shot. "Status report, Commander Hayes," Renard called. Ilara Hayes' face appeared on the holoscreen. Her expression was focused, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We're encountering strange fluctuations in the ship's power systems," she reported. "Nothing major yet, but there's something off about the barrier's energy field. It's affecting our sensors. We're not seeing it clearly, Captain." Renard's pulse quickened. She'd known the barrier was unlike anything they had encountered before, but this was more than just a challenge. The Aegis wasn't just navigating space. It was being drawn into something alive. "Increase shields by 25%, she ordered, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. "Prepare for turbulence." The ship shuddered suddenly, a jolt so powerful that several crew members were thrown from their seats. The warning lights flashed, signaling a power surge, and the Aegis tilted dangerously to the left, throwing Renard off balance. She gripped the control panel just in time, steadying herself. "Stabilizing," Ryan reported, his fingers flying over the console. "But we're entering the outer edge of the barrier's influence. The gravitational field is shifting. It's unlike anything we've ever experienced." Ilara's voice crackled through the comms again, now laced with urgency. "Captain, I'm detecting something on the outer edge of the barrier. It's not a natural phenomenon. It's artificial. Someone, or something, is manipulating the field. There's a signal. It's faint, but it's there." Renard's heart skipped a beat. The signal, the one Ilara had mentioned earlier, was coming from within the barrier. Could it be an alien intelligence, or a remnant of a civilization long lost? "Can you isolate the source?" Renard asked, her voice tight. "I'm trying, but it's difficult," Ilara replied, frustration creeping into her tone. "The signal keeps shifting. It's not stable, and our systems can't get a clear fix. The barriers, distorting everything around us. The closer we get, the more unstable it becomes." Suddenly, the ship lurched again. This time, it was far more violent. The deck trembled, and the sound of metal screeching under pressure reverberated through the walls. Red emergency lights blinked to life. "We're being pulled in," Ryan shouted. "I can't control the trajectory. It's too strong." The ship spiraled, drawn deeper into the heart of the barrier. The stars outside seemed to stretch and warp, bending unnaturally. A cacophony of crackling energy echoed from all sides, reverberating through the hull. "Brace for impact," Renard yelled, her voice barely audible over the growing storm of sound and fury. And then, with a sudden, bone-shaking lurch, the Aegis was swallowed by the barrier. The blackness of space outside vanished, replaced by a flickering, distorted void that defied comprehension. Time itself seemed to fracture as the ship careened through an endless storm of energy, light, and shadow, all bending and twisting at impossible angles. Crew members scrambled to stay in their seats as the ship's systems flickered and failed. In the chaos, the signal intensified, a low hum that now seemed to pulse through the very fabric of the universe itself. And in the midst of it all, a single thought gripped Renard's mind. What have we just stepped into? The Aegis tumbled through the void, its hull groaning under the strain of forces beyond anything its engineers had designed it to withstand. The crew was thrown about, struggling to maintain control as alarms blared across the command deck. "Status report," Captain Renard shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Shields at 50%. Lieutenant Ryan yelled from his console, his fingers flying across the controls. "Energy levels fluctuating, Captain. I can't get a lock on our location. The sensors are completely scrambled." Renard's gaze darted to the surrounding displays. Every readout was distorted, lines of static cutting across the screens as if the ship were caught between realities. The very fabric of space itself seemed to warp, pulling them deeper into the unknown. "Commander Hayes," Renard barked. "Can you make sense of any of this?" Hayes, pale but composed, was strapped into her seat, her eyes scanning the data streaming in. I don't know what's happening. The barriers of space are being shredded, fractured, like glass. Whatever force is inside this place is beyond anything we can measure. I'm seeing strange energy patterns, patterns that shouldn't exist." A sudden lurch sent the ship into a sharp roll. The crew gasped, bracing themselves as the gravitational field outside fluctuated violently. The ship's internal stabilization system struggled to adjust, but it was clear that they were out of their depth. "Is this it?" Ryan asked, his voice tight with fear. "Is this the end?" Renard looked around at the faces of her crew, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and terror. They had known this mission was dangerous, but the reality of it was far worse than anything they had imagined. "We can't give up," Renard said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. "We have to keep pushing forward. Earth's future depends on this. We break through, or we don't come back." As if in answer, the ship was rocked by another tremor, more violent than the last. A powerful force seemed to grasp the Aegis, dragging it into the heart of the anomaly. Outside the viewports, the swirling blackness began to clear, revealing a scene no human had ever laid eyes on. A bizarre, otherworldly landscape. The ship emerged into a vast expanse of shimmering, translucent structures suspended in midair, vast cities made of light and energy, floating in an impossibly still, glowing ocean. Renard's breath caught in her throat. "What is this place?" "This isn't just a barrier," Ilara said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is something. Alive." The signal, faint and dissonant at first, now pulsed with clarity. A deep, rhythmic hum echoed through the ship, vibrating in Renard's bones. It felt like an invitation, yet something far darker lingered in its depths. A presence, watchful, waiting. "Captain," Ryan said, his voice tense. "The ship, we're being pulled toward that structure. It's as if the entire place is a single living organism. It's drawing us in." The Aegis lurched again, its course now completely out of the crew's control. Renard could only watch as the ship was inexorably drawn toward the strange, glowing city ahead, the fabric of space around them, continuing to distort and warp. Time itself seemed to be stretching and bending, becoming more and more alien. "Brace for impact," Renard shouted. The ship's engines roared in protest, their systems failing to respond. The city loomed larger, its towering crystalline spires reflecting an eerie, unnatural light as the Aegis drew nearer. Renard's heart raced, her mind reeling with questions. Who, or what, had built this place? And what did it want with humanity? As the ship hurtled toward its destination, Renard knew one thing for certain. They had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The Aegis crashed through the shimmering barrier that encased the city. The ship shuddered violently as it passed through an invisible threshold, its hull vibrating under the strain of an unseen force. For a moment, the ship seemed to hang in midair, suspended in an eerie calm. Then, with a sickening jolt, the ship was released from the pull, and it hurtled toward the surface of the glowing city. "Brace!" Renard screamed, gripping the armrest of her chair as the ship plummeted toward the ground. Everything around her was a blur of brilliant light and distorted shapes. The glowing city loomed larger, its towering crystalline spires, now so close that Renard could see their intricate latticework, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying all at once. "Impact in 3, 2, Ryan counted, his voice trained. The ship slammed into the surface with a force that rattled every last nerve in Renard's body. The entire crew was thrown forward, their harnesses their only saving grace from being flung into the console panels. The Aegis skidded across the smooth, glass-like surface of the city, screeching as its hull scraped against the alien material. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and unbearable. For a moment, all was still. The rumbling subsided, and the oppressive silence returned. Renard blinked, her heart still racing. She slowly unstrapped herself from her seat, her body aching from the violent crash. She surveyed the damage. Panels flickered with static, sparks crackled from exposed wires, but the ship was mostly intact. "Report," Reynard barked. Ryan was the first to recover. "We're down, Captain," he said, his voice steady but edged with disbelief. We've landed inside the city." Renard turned to the viewport, her breath catching as she gazed out at the landscape. The city before them was unlike anything they had ever seen. Towering spires made of iridescent crystal, twisting and bending in impossible angles. The buildings seemed to shift and change as if alive, responding to some unseen force. The air itself seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic hum, reverberating through the ship's walls. "This is extraordinary," Ilara whispered, her eyes wide. "This is not just a city. It's a network, a living, breathing entity. The structures here, they're communicating with each other, somehow." Renard's gaze swept over the city. Despite the beauty of the scene, a sense of unease settled deep in her chest. The city was too silent, too still. It felt like a forgotten world, abandoned by time, or perhaps its creators. "Do we have contact?" Reynard asked. Ilara hesitated, typing furiously at her console. "No communication coming through, Captain. It's like the city is blocking us." Renard frowned. Something wasn't right. They had arrived in the heart of an ancient alien civilization, but there was no sign of life. The stillness was almost suffocating. "Captain," Ryan said, his voice lower than usual. "Look." He pointed to the horizon, where the city seemed to stretch into the distance. From beyond the skyline, something moved, fast, too fast to be anything natural. The shadow of a massive, shifting form emerged, its size dwarfing the city's towers. "What is that?" Reynard whispered, her heart skipping a beat. Ilara's voice trembled with awe. "That's no machine. It's alive." The massive shape moved toward them, its form blurry at first, but as it drew closer, its features began to become clear. An enormous entity, something not bound by the rules of physics as they understood them. It was a beam of light and shadow, its outline constantly shifting as if it was in constant motion, yet utterly still. "It's coming straight for us," Ryan warned. Renard's mind raced. What was this thing? What did it want? The rhythmic hum from the city grew louder, vibrating through the Aegis hull. It felt like the entire city was alive, and they were its prey. "Prepare for contact," Renard ordered, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "We need answers." The massive figure loomed closer, and with it, the silence of the city seemed to deepen, as though it was watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. The massive entity loomed before them, its form impossibly vast, a swirling mass of light and shadow that defied any attempt at comprehension. It was as if space itself was bending around it, creating ripples in the air that distorted everything in its wake. The Aegis shuddered again, the ship's systems flickering as if reacting to the entity's presence. Renard stood at the command console, her breath shallow, trying to make sense of the surreal image before her. "What is that thing?" Ilara's voice trembled as she stared at the alien being, her eyes wide with awe and fear. I've never seen anything like it. It's not made of matter, not the way we understand it. It's energy, but alive." Ryan's hands flew across his console, trying to establish some kind of communication or control, but every attempt was met with failure. "We can't connect to it. It's blocking every signal. We're completely cut off from the rest of the city." Renard's gaze flicked to the massive shadow that now hovered just outside the viewport. The figure seemed to pulse, a rippling effect spreading across its surface like the beating of a heart. The air around it seemed to shimmer and vibrate, as if the very fabric of reality was trembling in its presence. "This isn't good," Ryan muttered, his voice tinged with panic. "We're being surrounded." Elara nodded, her expression grim. "Whatever this thing is, it's not alone. It's connected to the city, maybe to everything in this space. The hum we're hearing. It's like a signal, and it's calling to something." Suddenly, the entity began to move, its immense form shifting slowly through the air, as if propelled by an invisible force. It drifted toward the Aegis, and Renard felt a coldness sweep over her, an overwhelming sense of dread that clawed at her insides. It wasn't just a physical presence, it was something more profound, something that reached into her very mind. Her heart raced as the entity came closer, and for a brief moment, the hum seemed to grow louder, vibrating in her bones, pressing against her consciousness. Then, without warning, a voice filled her mind, deep, resonant, and ancient. "Welcome." The word reverberated through her thoughts, and she felt an involuntary shiver run down her spine. It was not a voice she could hear with her ears, but one she could feel within herself, an invasive presence in her mind. "Who are you?" Reynard managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. The entity's presence seemed to ripple in response, and for a moment, the air around the Aegis seemed to freeze in place. Time itself felt suspended, as though the very universe was holding its breath. "We are the Watchers. We have seen your kind before. You have trespassed on our domain." The voice was not hostile, but there was an undeniable weight to it, as if it carried centuries of knowledge and judgment. Renard's mind raced. Watchers, trespassing. What did this being mean? And why had it allowed them to come this far? "What do you want from us?" she asked, gathering every ounce of courage she had left. The entity did not answer immediately. Instead, it seemed to consider her question, the silence stretching out longer than she could endure. "We offer you a choice. Leave this place and return to the stars, or stay and become part of the city. You will be remembered, but you will never leave." Renard's pulse quickened. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. If they left, they would have failed the mission. Earth's survival depended on them breaking through the barrier and gaining access to whatever lay beyond. But if they stayed, they would be lost, forever. "We can't leave," Renard said firmly, more to herself than to anyone else. "We can't turn back now." The entity's form rippled again, and a faint light flickered in its depths. "Then prepare yourselves." Without warning, the ship was lifted from the ground. The gravitational pull of the city intensified, and the Aegis was drawn upward, heading toward the core of the structure, toward something far deeper and more dangerous than Renard had ever anticipated. Renard tightened her grip on the chair, determination solidifying within her. They had come too far. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it, as humanity always had, head-on. The Aegis was pulled upward, defying the laws of physics as its engines sputtered in protest. Renard gripped the armrests, her knuckles white, as the ship was drawn into the heart of the alien city. The air inside the vessel felt thick and charged with energy, the hum reverberating through every metal surface. The entity's presence loomed like an oppressive force, its presence a constant pressure on Renard's mind. "Hold on," Ryan shouted, struggling to maintain control of the ship's systems. "It's like we're being sucked into a gravitational vortex. I can't break free." Renard's mind raced. The ship was being drawn into something far beyond their understanding, something powerful enough to distort reality itself. They had passed the barrier, but now they were caught in something much worse, a force that seemed to want to swallow them whole. But she couldn't afford to panic. Earth was counting on them. They had to find a way to survive, to push forward. "Captain, we need to think fast." Ilara's voice broke through the chaos in the cockpit. "Whatever this entity is, it's trying to trap us. We have to break free before it's too late." Renard nodded, her eyes fixed on the viewport, where the city's landscape had shifted dramatically. The twisting crystalline towers that had once seemed so distant now towered above them, their surfaces glowing with an almost ethereal light. The city's architecture had become even more alien, more incomprehensible, as if the laws of space and time were being rewritten around them. "We're not leaving without answers," Reynard said, her voice steady but firm. "We have to find the source of this force, whatever it is. If we can understand it, we can defeat it." But just as she finished speaking, the entity's presence intensified, and the ship lurched violently. The view outside the viewport shifted, showing an immense, shimmering core at the center of the city. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, an enormous sphere of radiant energy, pulsating with an almost hypnotic rhythm. It seemed to be alive, its surface swirling with colors that defied natural logic. "This is it," Ryan whispered, staring at the core in awe. "That's the heart of the city, the source of its power." Renard's heart skipped a beat. If the entity was connected to the core, then that was where they would have to confront it. But it was no simple task. The city itself was alive, and every part of it seemed to be aligned with the entity's will. It felt as though the entire city was watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. "We're almost there," Ilara said, her voice strained. "The gravitational field is weakening. We're being pulled in." "Not yet," Reynard ordered, her gaze locked on the pulsating core. She could feel the weight of their mission bearing down on her, but she knew they couldn't afford to fail. "Not now." She turned to Ryan. "Get us as close as you can. We need to find a way to disrupt whatever is controlling the core." Ryan nodded, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship lurched again, but this time, the ship seemed to respond to his efforts. They weren't being drawn into the core, but they were hovering just outside of its reach, suspended in space like an insect caught in a web. "Ilara," Reynard said, her voice resolute, "we need to figure out what this core is. Find anything you can that might give us an edge." Ilara nodded quickly, tapping away at her console. "I'm on it, Captain." The hum from the city grew louder, vibrating in Renard's chest as she watched the core, its brilliant light pulsing with an ominous rhythm. The entity's presence loomed even larger now, and it was as though the city itself was drawing breath, its very being aligning with the entity's will. But they had no choice. They had come too far to turn back now. With a determined breath, Renard glanced at her crew. "We have to break this. This city, this entity, it won't stop until we're part of its domain. But we're human. We don't give up." And with that, they prepared for what came next, knowing that the true battle had only just begun. The Aegis hovered on the edge of the alien core, its engines humming with strained energy as Ryan fought to keep the ship stable. The gravitational force from the center of the city was stronger now, but they had managed to slow their descent, just enough to give them a fighting chance. Reynard stood at the front of the command center, her eyes fixed on the glowing core that pulsed rhythmically before them. She could feel its energy, raw, primal, and alive. The presence of the entity, however, loomed even larger now, like a predator circling its prey. "Ilara, what do we know about the core?" Reynard's voice was steady, though beneath the calm, the tension was palpable. Ilara's fingers flew across her console, the light of her screen illuminating her face. "It's not just a power source. It's a focal point. The core seems to be a conduit for the entity's power, an anchor that links it to the entire city. But it's more than that. It's alive. In some way. It's almost like it's controlling the flow of time and space here." Ryan let out a frustrated groan. "That's not helpful. We need a way to stop it, not just understand it." Renard's gaze shifted to the viewport again. The core's light flickered, its rhythmic pulse drawing her in. Every instinct told her that the key to defeating this entity, to breaking its hold over the city, was inside that sphere. But the closer they got, the more overwhelming its presence became, seeping into her thoughts and clouding her judgment. "You're right, Ryan," Reynard said, her voice gaining strength. "We need to destroy it. But we can't just attack it blindly. If the entity is tied to it, then anything we do could make things worse. We need to disrupt the link, sever the connection." Ilara's eyes widened as she processed the information. Wait. If the core is the link, maybe there's a way to reverse the energy flow. Disrupting the energy might destabilize the entity's connection to the city, cutting off its power. Renard nodded sharply. "How do we do that?" "We'll need to drain the core's energy," Ilara said, her voice focused. "It's a massive task, but we have a weapon in our arsenal, the pulse charges we've been carrying. If we can get close enough to the core, we can plant them directly inside the structure and overload it from within." Ryan looked up sharply. "That's suicide. The core's energy output is off the charts. Any closer, and the ship will be torn apart." Renard's eyes locked with Ryan's. There was no time for hesitation. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, we'll be trapped here forever. And Earth will never survive the entity's expansion." For a moment, the tension in the cockpit was thick, heavy with the weight of the decision they were about to make. But there was no other path forward. They had come this far, and they had already crossed too many lines to retreat now. Ilara's fingers moved quickly across the control panel, pulling up the schematics for the core. "If we can get the pulse charges into its center, we might have a shot at destabilizing it. But we'll need to get as close as we can. We'll need precision." Renard looked over at her expression fierce. "Then we do it. Prepare the pulse charges. We'll make our move when we're ready." As Ilara and Ryan began preparing the necessary adjustments, Renard allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She glanced at the crew, each one determined and resolute, ready to risk everything. Humanity's future lay in their hands. There was no turning back now. The time to face the heart of the beast had come. Renard stood at the helm of the Aegis, her eyes fixed on the glowing core that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. Every passing second felt heavier, every inch closer to the core bringing them to the edge of oblivion. The crew was ready. Ryan had the ship at the optimal distance for the pulse charges. Ilara had calculated the trajectory, and the entire team had come together with one singular goal: to sever the link between the entity and the city. "We're set." Ilara's voice was calm, but there was an underlying edge of urgency. "The pulse charges are in position. All we need now is the right moment to deploy them." Renard took a deep breath. The ship trembled under the strain of the gravitational field, and the air seemed to vibrate with the growing presence of the entity. It was aware of them, watching them, sensing their every move. The oppressive force had been growing stronger by the minute, seeping into their minds, pulling at their very souls. "Prepare for deployment," Renard ordered, her voice steady. "We'll release them at the exact moment the core's energy fluctuates. That's our window." Ryan nodded grimly from his station. "The closer we get, the harder it will be to break free, Captain. If we don't succeed, we're not leaving." "I know," Renard replied, "but we'll succeed." The ship rocked violently as it edged closer to the core. The once beautiful city around them had become a twisted labyrinth of energy, every surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. The heart of the city, the core, now appeared to be more than just a power source. It was an entity in its own right, feeding on the life force of the city itself. Every second they lingered within its pull brought them closer to being consumed. Ilara's fingers flew over her console, tracking the pulses of the core. The energy fluctuations coming up. "We've got less than a minute." Renard's heart pounded as the countdown echoed in her mind. She glanced at her crew, at Ryan, who had his hands on the controls, and at Ilara, whose concentration was absolute. They were all committed to the same outcome. Then it happened. The core's pulse flared, and for a brief moment, the lights surrounding it dimmed, its rhythmic beating stuttering as though it had faltered. The opportunity had arrived. "Now," Renard shouted. Ryan slammed the launch sequence, and with a roar, the pulse charges shot from the Aegis, streaking through the vacuum of space toward the heart of the core. Time seemed to slow as Renard watched, her eyes locked on the trajectory. The charges pierced the heart of the energy sphere, embedding themselves deep inside. For a split second, there was only silence. Then the explosion hit. A wave of energy surged outward, rippling through the fabric of space itself. The Aegis was rocked by the shockwave, its hull groaning under the force. The core's pulse shattered, the entity's hold on the city breaking apart in an instant. The gravitational field released its grip, sending the Aegis spiraling outward. Renard's grip tightened on the console as she fought to regain control. The shockwave from the explosion sent the ship tumbling through space, but Ryan was quick, his hands steady on the controls as he fought to right their course. "We're free," Ryan exclaimed, a look of disbelief crossing his face. Ilara let out a sigh of relief. "The core's destabilized. The entity's connection to the city is severed. We did it." Renard exhaled, the weight of the mission lifting from her shoulders. But as she glanced out the viewport, her mind began to race once more. The city, once a beacon of alien technology, was now crumbling, its energy flickering out of existence. The Aegis was out of danger, but the galaxy had changed. "We've done what we needed to do," Renard said softly. "But this isn't over. We've just broken through the final frontier, and the consequences will ripple far beyond this city." Her crew nodded, aware that their victory had set into motion a new chapter in humanity's journey. The shattered barrier had been breached, but the universe was vast, and humanity's fight to secure their place in it was far from over. And as the Aegis drifted through the void, Renard knew that Earth's legacy had only just begun.